Hello, friends. Welcome to the Cold War Prepper. And tonight we are doing Civics 101, or Introduction to U.S. Government. So we're basically following the American government. This is a senior high school book on U.S. civics and government. So we're pretty much following it. We started out by doing the Constitution. We did the articles of the Constitution, explained all those articles and everything else. Then we went into the amendments, and we did all the amendments. And then we started using the Sabato book. And now there is some duplication because there are some places like, I believe, let me see. Today we're talking about bureaucracy and U.S. government institutions. And I believe next week we start talking about the judicial, which, remember, was Article 3 of the Constitution. So let me check here, just one real quick. Let me check on, Chapter 10 is the judiciary. So next week we'll basically be kind of recapping again with a little bit more added to it, what we discussed with the Article 3 of the Constitution. Remember, Article 1 is Congress, Article 2 is the presidency, Article 3 is the judiciary. It's been a rough day, I tell you. So we had the total eclipse here at 1:36. And it lasted for about just under 4 minutes. It was kind of exciting. So that was kind of neat. It didn't get as dark as I expected it to, but, you know, it did get dark. We also had a major drop in temperatures, which is why I'm wearing my jacket, because we got everything set up for summer. And, of course, whenever you turn on your air conditioning, then all of a sudden you're going to have a drop in temperature. So I decided to stay a little bit warm. Plus, I had to go to the doctor again this morning. I woke up yesterday. I had a really hard time. I spent a lot of time at church yesterday. Yesterday was a Divine Mercy Sunday. And so I spent a lot of time at the church. And then I came home and I didn't feel too well. I had the chills. I had a bad cough. I may cough a little bit here tonight. It turns out that I had to go to the doctor again this morning because I just shivered and froze all night long. And so I went to the doctor, and it's a recurring issue I have. And she said it's the COPD. Just, you know, my lungs are compromised, and so whenever we have something come in like the allergens that we've got coming in now, it's just going to continue to exacerbate it. So I'm back on prednisone and doxycycline, and you know that's an every 3-month thing. If you're smoking, quit. That's probably what has destroyed my lungs was that 40 years worth of smoking in the military. So there are things we do that are not the best things for us, and that's probably one of my biggest mistakes was starting to smoke in the first place. Oh my gosh, and it took me a while to get used to that, but here we are. It is what it is, So let me see who else here. Do me a favor, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. And if you would hit either the thumbs up or the thumb down, either one, let us know where we are. Hello, Joel. Welcome. And Utah Mike, welcome to you as well. And Diana 2940, welcome. Little Lone Prepper, welcome. And Triple G, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. And Triple G is out of town this week, so he is doing this on his cell phone, I believe, in a hotel room while he's out of town for business. Stray Kitten, welcome. Good evening. Holly Ivans. Let me see. Cats and Prepping. And Green Grass Grows. That's a new name. Hello from Pennsylvania. Hello. What part of Pennsylvania? I did some work for Pennsylvania Electric Company. I did the 3 nuclear power plants. I did some HR work there. And that was 3 Mile Island, Limerick, which is right outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, and Peach Bottom, which is on the river there between Maryland and Pennsylvania. So, gosh, that's a beautiful area. I tell you what, it's hard to believe, that George Washington spent that summer there. It could be that bad. Of course, I was there in the summer, but just gorgeous. It appears to be so gorgeous. I can't imagine what it'd be with snow and ice and everything else. But they don't call it Valley Forge anymore. What do they call it? It's now one of where George Washington was encamped is not far from one of the largest malls in Pennsylvania. I forget. Okay, so let me reiterate, and Joel, you raise a good question, and so does Utah Mike. So the discussion that I had on the phone with one or two of my moderators, and I'll have this discussion here with everybody, is this is our channel. This is not just my channel. I would like to keep it focused on the topic we're discussing. I also want to make sure that everybody is kind, polite, and respectful to each other. If you can't do that, then I would ask that you not participate. I have also given the authority to my moderators. And King of Prussia Mall, that's it. Thank you, Greengrass Grows. So that's right there. That is Valley Forge, if I'm not mistaken. So what I've asked my my moderators to do is, if they find somebody offensive, before they take any actions, to take a vote, basically, of the other moderators and other people on the channel, and we will respect what the majority of people want. And so if the majority of people say, hey, this guy's a good guy, and let him speak, and then we're going to have to let that happen. If the majority say he's disturbing us and we don't want to be subjected to this kind of poo-poo, then what they say goes. Theoxerus, welcome. Good evening, my friend. So that's kind of where we are. I'm leaving it up to the moderators and to the participants as to basically who all can offer opinions. How's that? KP Heathen, welcome. You're from Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken, right? Okay, so the roots of the federal bureaucracy. So basically, the war between the states, the war of northern aggression, made a lot of changes to our government. So I would say that is the beginning of the decline of the Constitution as it was written in the United States, is the war of northern aggression. And so as a result of that, we see a lot of things happening. We did not have a standing army per se. We had more of a navy than we did an army. There was a little bit of an army, kind of semi helping with the westward expansion, but not really. Those were basically state militias that were doing the majority of that. After 1865, then we see a lot more bureaucracy coming into the government. We also see a lot more growth in the military. And so we see, hello, Sumi, welcome. One of my favorite Canadians. So we see a lot of growth in the government. We also see, starting with the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, we see eventually, in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes we ever made, the 17th Amendment. Of course, the 16th Amendment. Why did they want income tax? They had to fund all this bureaucracy that they were creating in a post-Civil War era. So, when you increase the size of the government, somebody's got to pay for it. And so that's where the taxes came in, and that's where income tax came in, was basically to pay for the post-war expansion of government. So basically, if you want to blame anything on our current size of our government, it all had its roots basically with the Civil War. Now, think about that for just a minute. We had something akin, not called the same thing, but akin to the Veterans Administration, okay? And you're going to find that this is also going to cause some riots when the government doesn't meet its obligations to the veterans who were wounded, permanently disabled, and all this other kinds of stuff, or to the families of those who gave their lives, regardless of which side they were on. But the government was in a monetary fix because, they couldn't do it. And then a lot of the infrastructure had been destroyed. A lot of the agricultural infrastructure in the South was destroyed by Sherman's March to the Sea. So, all that produce, especially cotton, that we were sending over to Europe in that triangle of trade, that got us a lot of foreign currency to fund our government, because by that right then, the vast majority of our income was tariffs and other things. Hello, Gil. Welcome. Good to see you. So we were using tariffs to bring in the vast majority of our money, and then after the war, then all of a sudden we had to create an income tax in order to do it. James Garfield. Now remember, he gave one of the longest speeches. What was it called? Indoctrination? Not indoctrination. What is that called? When they swear him in. But anyhow, he gave one of the longest speeches ever, and he was the second president to be assassinated. But he was a distinguished Civil War officer. He saw a spoils system in place in the bureaucracy, and that is that people who knew the president got the appointments into these civil service jobs. Garfield changed all that, and he created a civil service system along with the Pendleton Act, which was Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. And he said, no, we don't want to hire people based on who they know. We want to hire people based on what they know. So that started the civil service system, where all of a sudden you had to apply. There were certain tests, cognitive tests, and everything else that were used in order to get admission into civil service. Now, the only change from that was basically in 1978, when they gave two things. Number one, they gave they gave you points, extra points, and this is part of the equality issue. So veterans received 10 extra points, I believe, and disabled veterans received 15 extra points to the score on their test in order to bring them up so that they could get more civil service jobs. And then we also had minorities as a result of the 1963 Civil Rights Act. Were also given some preferential points because of their minority status in order to get them hired on with the civil service. Then all of a sudden we had a lot of commerce, interstate commerce was going on. So this becomes very evident when we talk about the, the overtime and can you believe an HR guy is forgetting his laws? But we have the, it defines exempt, non-exempt, child labor, overtime, NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act. And so the National Labor Relations Act says you're exempt from the NLRA, overtime, child labor, all those different issues, as long as you are not involved in interstate commerce. Well, here's the thing. Let's say that you are in Oklahoma and you have AT&T as your phone business, as your phone system. Well, AT&T headquarters is in San Antonio, Texas. All of a sudden, just because you have a phone from AT&T, you're now engaged in interstate commerce. So it's very difficult to prove that you don't have some sort of interstate commerce within your organization so that you aren't subject to the NLRA. So almost every company can show that they that they have to subject themselves to the NLRA. But the reason I bring that up is because all of that interstate commerce stuff is as a result of the Interstate Commerce Commission that was created in 1887. And so they were overseeing all of this stuff that goes in between and among all the different states. And so that was the beginning of what we consider the interstate commerce system. So now one of the things that we notice is our government grows every time that every time that there is a war, our government grows exponentially. Now, in a lot of the graphs that are in this book, they don't include the size of the military. Some of them do. But other than the post office, the military is definitely the largest single government entity. Then after the military comes the post office. If you take the military out of the equation, then the post office is about 75% of the remainder of the civil servants in our government. Now, remember, the post office is quasi-governmental. And how they do this, I don't know. But they're governed by Congress, but they aren't subject to civil service rules. And they can be unionized, whereas the Fair Labor Standards Act, National Labor Relations Act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is the one that does overtime and everything else. The National Labor Relations Act is the one that determines unionization. But the National Labor Relations Act says you cannot have a unionized government entity. So what they did was the post office is considered quasi-governmental. So, they're allowed to have a union. But, oh gosh, it's something else. Let me see. I don't know, Joel. I don't know the answer to that question. If you want to look it up, that would be great. That would be something. But of course, according to the way the Constitution is written, and we covered this quite well in one of our first classes, and it doesn't say firearms in the amendment. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the protection of a free state, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So at the time that the Constitution was written, the primary arms for the settlers were tomahawk, knife, and musket. So that includes all three of those, basically. That's what was included. That's what if you read the Federalist Papers, that's what was included. So basically, nobody should have their rights to any one of those three items denied them. So anyhow, so we have this fantastic chart here that is just really shows something. But if you take a look at it, look at the size of our government here back in the early days. And then this spike here is World War II. So all of a sudden with the military and everything else, we really had an extremely large government. And then when we had the peace treaty, we lost a lot of those military, and they were made up for by civil service. And then we continued to grow. So now we are pretty close. So you can see what happened during the Trump years. We got rid of a whole bunch of them, and we're starting to go on the upward path again of more bureaucrats and more civil servants. And that's crazy. We probably need to get rid of them, a lot of them. So, but it seems as if every time we get involved in a war, our bureaucracy expands. You can call them unions, Gil, but they're not. They're officially called associations because of the NLRA banning unions in government. So, but they call them associations. They have a lot of the same characteristics, but you won't see anything as a, quote, union. Other than police officers. I believe police officers, and then the firefighters have a firefighters brotherhood, which basically you could call it a union, but so see, that's a federation. That's not, we're going to get into semantics. I will tell you the National Labor Relations Act says that government organizations cannot be unionized. So if you follow the law, that's what the law says, okay? So the modern bureaucracy. There's little reason for government employees to take risks or to go beyond their assigned job tasks. In contrast, private employers are far more likely to reward ambition. So this was a joke when I was on active duty. And so the joke was that the best way to get promoted in the military and in civil service is not to make any decisions. Because if you make a decision, it's a bad decision, you get written up for it and you get kicked out, right? If you don't make any decisions, then you never have anything to get written up about. There's nothing to punish you for. So if you don't make any decisions and just go along to get along, you get promoted. And so yes men get promoted, and that's just the way it is. And so the way the system, the promotion system, the performance management system in government entities is designed is it stifles any kind of risk taking, because there's a chance that when you take a risk, when you take a chance at doing something that kind of out of the envelope or kind of out of the perimeters of what you might call normalcy, to do something a little bit, push the envelope, I guess it's called. If it fails, then you're on a chopping block. If it succeeds, of course, somebody else is going to get the credit. So that's just the way it is. Okay. So as it is right now, about 70% of all civil servants belong to the executive branch, okay? The legislative branch, now remember, when they wrote the and I just said it a couple of minutes ago, Fair Labor Standards Act. When they wrote the Fair Labor Standards Act, there's three versions of the FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act. There's one for commercial enterprises or private businesses. There's one for government entities. And the primary difference there is that governmental entities don't have to pay overtime. What they do is, in lieu of overtime, they give what's called CTO, compensatory time off. So if you work more than 40 hours in a week, let's say you work 41 hours, then they give you an hour and a half of PTO, paid time off, or compensatory time off, CTO. And then you're allowed to use that at any point in the future that you want to take time off. So that's the difference between private industry and the government. Now, the third one is legislative bodies are pretty much exempt from everything under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So, for example, if you want to be a secretary for the Senate or the House of Representatives, or you want to be an aide to a congressman or something like that, they don't even have to pay you minimum wage. They don't have to limit you to a 40-hour work week. They are totally exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. So that's just the way the law was written. Now, if you belong to one of the organizations like the government printing office, or those other agencies that basically work for Congress, but not a direct appointee of a congressperson, then what happens is you are subject to everything else the same way as normal government employee. Okay, so who are the bureaucrats? So it says appointive policy-making positions. Nearly 3,500 people in the bureaucracy are presidential appointees. Then there are independent regulatory commissioners. Although each president gets to appoint as many as 100 commissioners, they become independent of his or her political influence once they take office. And so the one of the three, you got legislative, judicial, and executive, the presidency. The one of the three that has the least number of people working for them is the judicial, then the legislative, then the post office, and then the executive branch. Okay, so the executive branch is the one that has all the people working for it. And so that's going to be, if you take a look at the secretaries in the cabinet, anybody who works for one of those secretaries basically is going to be part of that executive group. So, for example, you see Gill's talking about DHS. So he worked for the secretary of DHS. And so he was a civil service employee under the executive branch of the government. Okay. Now, here's another interesting thing. When a president writes an executive order, it really only has effect over employees that he has control over. So he only has control over the executive branch. So he can't tell the Supreme Court what to do. He can't tell Congress what to do. He can only tell, let's say, for example, under DOD, since you have the Secretary of Defense belongs to the president, part of his cabinet, he can say, or she can say, this is what's going to happen in our military. Okay. And then it has to happen that way. They give a breakout of demographics for civil service. I don't know if it's that important or not. 56.1% of the civil servants are male. 49.3% of all civil servants are male. 50.7%. Let me see if I'm reading this right. Okay, nope, I'm doing that wrong. 56.1% of civil service is male compared to 49.3% of the population. So they're overrepresented versus the population. 43.9% of civil servants are female compared to 50.7% of the population. So they're underrepresented as a percentage of the population. Then by a total of 2 to 1, the lower grades, GS 1 through 4, you have twice as many females as males, and GS 5 through 8, which are upper lower grade or lower middle grade, whichever way you want to look at it. you have, once again, almost 1.5, 1 3/4 to 1 male versus female population. In the, I'm sorry, I take that back. The females outnumber the males. So in the lowest 4 grades and then the next 4 grades, females outrank males as far as representation. And then GS 9 through 12, male 54%, female 46%. And then in GS 13 through 15, male is 65.4%, female 34.6%. I believe that part of this problem in underrepresentation of females is that historically, I'm going to say up until my generation, probably the late 60s, females didn't get as high an education as males. And so there was this proclivity towards wanting higher education as a qualification. You got points for your education. And I think that's beginning to change. I think we're seeing a lot more females in the higher echelons, but we're also still seeing a whole bunch of females in the lower echelons. My first wife's mother was a GS4 at Fort Bliss, and she was a clerk typist. And but I can, she was a high school graduate, and all she knew how to do was type. So all that other kinds of stuff that you might need in order to get a higher pay grade wasn't there. Now, Helen's sister was a Social Security manager, and she was a GS17. So that's pretty high. And, but that came, and she didn't have any college either. All she had was high school, but she worked her way up the ranks and continued to go to school and improve herself. So, that's basically where we got. Okay. So other characteristics that you might find interesting, 68% of the civil servants are white compared to 67% of the population. So they're only 1% overrepresented. Hispanics are about half of their population, 7.5% employees, 15.4% represented in the population. African Americans are overrepresented. They have 17.2% of the civil servants are African American, and they only constitute 11.4% of the population. Asian and Pacific Island Americans are overrepresented in the fact that they have 5.3% compared to 4.4% of the population. And American Indians are slightly overrepresented as well in the fact that they have 2.1%, whereas their actual population is less than 2% of the overall population. Other characteristics, 6.8% of the civil service employees are disabled. 43% of them are college educated compared to 27.4% of the population, and 21% are veterans. And that's because, remember, you got those preferential treatment for being a veteran. So 21% are veterans compared to where we only represent 10.1% of the overall population. So let me see. Let me catch up with comments. Let me see where we are here. So let me see. Post office is needed. Rest of bureaucracy really isn't. Postal workers were kept safe. Yeah. I had to go to so one of our regulars mailed me something, and she sent me the tracking information on it, and it arrived at the post office yesterday morning at 3:00. So I figured if I went to the post office at 10:00 this morning, it would be in my mailbox, but no, it wasn't. So then I checked online, and it says it's available for pickup, and it was available for pickup an hour or two after I went to the post office. I didn't want to fight with all the traffic for the eclipse, so because we were right in the path of total eclipse. So, there's a lot of traffic on the roads today, and billboards everywhere. Do not pull over on the highway to watch the eclipse. Let me see. I have a tendency to agree with you, Theoxerus. I believe that now one thing that has kind of saved the post office is that they've entered into an agreement with UPS, so that USPS and UPS both carry UPS packages, and USPS can deliver UPS packages to your mailbox. That's a recent change, only in about the last 5 years. Now, what really ticks me off about that is when I owned my shipping store, and it's kind of like a UPS store, but we took every carrier. As a matter of fact, we originally were FedEx only, and then FedEx started FedEx Kinkos, and they kicked us out. So we decided we would carry, and we shipped FedEx, UPS, Texas Overnight, DHL, and USPS. So we had 5 major carriers. And but gosh, the post office would deliver UPS packages to my closed store on Sundays and leave them on the sidewalk. And we were right next door to the busiest Starbucks in town. And so quite often what would happen is the manager of the Starbucks would come get my mail and take it into her store and protect my customers who had mailboxes that stuff was going to be delivered to. So sometimes, the post office gets overly bureaucratic in following their rules. But amen. I agree with that, Diana, too. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Let me see. Did this come up? There we go. I don't have any opinion on that, so we'll go with yours. Whoa! Now there's an idea, Triple G. Absolutely, I could see that as well. So some of the fleets, UPS has their own fleet of aircraft. UPS has their own. DHL has their own. I mean, it's just unbelievable what people have. So yeah. So and Little Known Preppers reinforcing what I said earlier, that the agreement between U.S. Postal Service and I know for sure UPS. I don't. Of course, I sold the store 3 or 4 years ago, so I don't know if they now have an agreement with FedEx or not. But I do know that they deliver for UPS. So yeah, you're absolutely correct there. Let me see. Yeah, we are pretty much owned by China, aren't we? I don't know. That would be a take. That would be a tough one. So let's talk about cabinet departments. So we can take a look at basically how they were formed. So first they formed independent regulatory commissions, and these were kind of like early precursors to the Food and Drug Administration and things like that. And of course, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. But then they also formed some government corporations. So, and I've talked about one in particular a couple times. So back in the early 30s, with the Rural Electrification Act (REA), and I believe the REA was passed in 33. But I could be wrong. So don't hold me to that. But look up REA, Rural Electrification Act. But anyhow, with that, they wanted to provide power to the outside rural areas because most of the electric power was being produced and consumed in urban areas. So they were trying to get it out to the farmers and out to the rural areas. So they had 2 big hydroelectric projects that they were going to do. One was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the other was called the Lower Colorado River Authority. So the Tennessee Valley Authority, they had enough money to fund it. So, Civilian Conservation Corps built a lot of that. And then in Texas, we had the Lower Colorado River Authority. Well, they didn't have enough money to fund that. So what happened was we have the only joint corporation that is jointly owned by a state and the federal government, and that's the Lower Colorado River Authority. So that's a joint federal state project. And they built 5 dams on the Lower Colorado River, the Highland Lakes, basically, or what we call them. And so those 5 dams provide most of the electricity to the Central Texas area, although that is switching over now to wind turbines and solar panels. As a matter of fact, the ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, put out a warning that because of the 3 minutes to 4 minutes, I think it was 3 minutes and 56 seconds, that we were going to have a total eclipse of the sun. And I think the whole thing, where it was partially eclipsed to total eclipse to partial eclipse, was going to last something like 8 or 9 minutes, that it was going to have a dramatic effect on our solar power. And let me see if I had any downage as far as solar production. Just real quick, I'm sorry. My in phase, there we go. So I'm looking at the 1 o'clock hour, see if I had a dramatic reduction in solar power for that 10, 15, 20 minutes that we had the eclipse. Oh, wow. Yeah. So it went, let me, come on. I'm trying to get here where I can see the times. So at, basically at 1:30, I produced 224 watt hours. Then at 1:45, and we had, so this is right in the middle of the total eclipse, I produced 20 hours. And then right after that, as the eclipse went through on the other side, I went to 232 watt hours. And then it went from there up to 998. So my average throughout the day has been about 998-ish throughout the day, except we went down to just 40 during the eclipse. So that's really something. Wow. No, I'm sorry. Yeah. 20 during the solar eclipse. Wow. Interesting. So interesting data there. Okay. So that's the government corporation. So let's take a look at the cabinet positions and when they were formed and who formed them and basically what they're supposed to do. So the first 3 were state, treasury, and war. It was called the Department of War. We changed the name after World War II. So up through World War II, up through 1945, it was called the Department of War. And then at the end of World War II, we changed it over to the Department of Defense. So that was just a name change. The first ambassador we had to France was Benjamin Franklin. And that was in 1789. In 1849, they formed the Department of the Interior, which manages the nation's natural resources, wildlife, and public lands. In 1870 came the Department of Justice. There had always been an attorney general. The Department of Justice did not attain cabinet status until after the War of Northern Aggression. In 1889, agriculture was added, and that's because they needed to better get the nation back in recovery. Remember, I told you about Sherman's March to the Sea and basically destroying a lot of the farmlands, peanut farms, and everything else. And so we had to get a national level effort on getting back to production of our crops so that we could feed and clothe the majority of our population. Oh, wow. Cats and Prepping's talking about that Rural Electrification Act that she didn't get electric until the 1940s. My grandmother lived in a very small town, a little place called Galt, Missouri. No, I'm sorry, Laredo, 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 Missouri. And she lived inside the city, inside the town limits. I hate to call it a city. She lived inside the town limits, did not have electricity, did not have sewage, and did not have running water. She had a pump, she had an outhouse, and she had an oil lantern that I burned my hand on severely when I didn't realize that the glass globe would be really hot when she told me to burn it, to blow it out. But anyhow, but that was, and I would say I was spending the summers with her up until maybe 8th grade. So I was about 13. So this had to be about 1965, 1967-ish, that she still had an outhouse, pump water, and no electricity. In 1903, we formed the Departments of Commerce and Labor. So progressive reforms illustrate the need for departments to aid both employers and employees, and then they were divided in 1913. So basically, commerce represents the employer, labor represented the employee. In 1953, we added Health and Human Services, which was originally called HUE, Health, Education, and Welfare, but then it was split in 1979, but they also had Social Security. And then in 1975, education was taken out and added separately. In 1960s, housing and transportation, increased federal activity in social programs, necessitated the creation of these departments. And then 1970s, energy and education. So in 79 is when the education broke off from Health, Education, and Welfare and changed that name to Health and Human Services. And then we also had the Department of Energy. In 1989, we had the Department of Veterans Affairs. Funny, we've had veterans since before the Constitution, before we had a president, and we didn't even consider having a special department to take care of them until 1989. Then, of course, the last one was the Department of Homeland Security that was created in 2002 after the terrorist attacks on New York City and other places. So the only other thing I want to cover in this book basically is how a regulation is made. Now, regulations have the full force of law, okay? So we've created this bureaucracy, and we say, and Congress writes a law, and it says that the executive branch has the full power to implement rules and regulations in order to affect it happening, right? So one of the ones that we've noticed get really out of control is the Environmental Protection Agency. They can publish a rule, it becomes a regulation, bingo, you have to follow it because Congress gave them the authority to create those laws without any oversight. And so a lot of places do that. Some of them still have some retention of basic things. For example, the post office does not have the authority to set their own postal rates. That has to be approved by Congress. What are some others? Social Security, how much is withheld from paycheck and how much is doled out is still governed by Congress. So there are certain limitations. There are some things they did not give up all of the rulemaking to those agencies, but in a lot of them, they've given up almost all of it. So this is how it works, okay? So the judicial decision, a new legislation, executive branch decision, an interest group or individual petition, or a media pressure can cause a new rule to be drafted for preliminary consideration. The Office of and that's step one. Step two is the Office of Management and Budget reviews the objectives and evaluates the costs. If it is a net zero or a positive revenue flow, then it moves on to step three. If it's not, it's disapproved and has to be rewritten before it can go on because we're not allowed to have any rules that basically cost more than what we're going to take in to pay for them. Step three, advance notice of proposed rulemaking is issued, and that's in what's called the Federal Register. So you can subscribe to the Federal Register and you can see all the rules that they're proposing. It has to appear in there 3 times before it's finally considered. The draft is circulated to industry, to affected groups, and hearings are held. And these are called public hearings, where let's say I'm going to have a new rule on emissions for semi trucks. Okay. Well, if I propose a new rule for semi trucks, then I probably want to have some input from truck manufacturers, from trucking companies, from commerce, and all these other departments if EPA is writing this rule. So that's where they invite in the public comments. But it does not say they have to pay attention to them. It just says they have to hear them. Okay, so that's step 4. If the draft is disapproved, then it goes back to basic step 1. If it's approved, it goes to proposed regulations published in the Federal Register for 30 to 60 days, and you're allowed to submit written comments during that 30 to 60 day period. Then those comments are evaluated and a final draft is written. Notice there's no public review of the final draft. Then the next step is it goes to the Office of Management and Budget for a final budgetary review to see if it's neutral, income positive, or income negative. If it's income negative, then it gets disapproved, goes back to step 1. If it is income positive or neutral, then it goes to a new regulation being published in the Federal Register as a new regulation. So that whole process can typically take years. Now, remember, when you read Article 1 of the Constitution, especially the way that the Senate was originally intended to be, government was supposed to be slow. Changes in governmental regulations, rules, laws, and everything else were not supposed to just go willy-nilly through the process. Although we saw some of that willy-nilliness take place under Schumer and what was his name from Nevada? Harry Reid. Harry Reid suspended rules to get what he wanted passed. And then, of course, you have Nancy Pelosi, who said that she deemed a budget passed instead of actually getting it passed. So, that's just it. And so kind of where we are. So that's all I really wanted to cover this evening. So executive control, I told you about executive orders, control those. And, now we're getting a lot more involved in, now we do have a little bit of congressional oversight. There's both remember, we talked about it when we talked about Congress, there's both the Senate and the House oversight committees. So they can call in any of these governmental agencies. As a matter of fact, it's the House Oversight Committee that called in Mayorkas and is in the process of considering impeachment against him, which will never happen because you have to have 2/3 of the Senate vote to impeach him, and 51% of the Senate is Democrat. So, they will not approve an impeachment of Mayorkas. So that's kind of a game in futility. But anyhow, that's pretty much it. So next week, we'll be talking about the judicial branch. Let me check your comments, and then we'll see where we are. And we might get out of here early tonight. Let me see. So there used to still be some of the CCC dirt roads in the mountains here. My dad used to like to drive on them. As a matter of fact, when I worked for the state, Air Pollution Control Agency. It was called the Texas Air Control Board. I was the HR director there. And then we merged. We had, what was her name? I forget her name. Harley Davidson gave her a Harley. And her daughter basically burnt down the governor's mansion when she was smoking marijuana in the attic of the governor's mansion. But what was her name? But anyhow, she asked our directors in our agency to resign so that she could gain control over air pollution. And we said, no, that's the reason why we have 6 commissioners, each of them with alternating 6-year appointments, so that you have a new one every year, so that way no one governor could control the entire agency. And she said, well, either you resign so I can get replacements, or I'll do away with your agency. And the Senate Bill 2 in 1991 happened, and they took like 17 state agencies: the Texas Water Well Drillers Board, Texas Water Commission, the Texas Air Control Board, all these different agencies, and merged them into one that was called the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission. So when we did all of our planning meetings and everything else, and we wanted to have kind of like a getaway retreat, because I was selected to be the new HR director, we went to some old cabins that were used by the Civilian Conservation Corps up on Lake Buchanan. And so they still have that available, and that's basically for state resources. So any state agency can use those for retreats or executives, decision-making retreats and things like that. So yeah, so we still have a lot of CCC stuff here in Central Texas as well. I do not doubt that at all. I don't, when I take a look at there's a lot of areas that still don't have. When my mother passed away, she had bought some land. There's a place up here on the shore of Lake Travis, and she bought some land there. I forget the name of the community, but she was so proud of that land. She had a half acre, and it was just unbelievable. It was gorgeous, and it overlooked Lake Travis, and it was, on the Colorado River. And she bought that in 1976, 1977. And so when she passed away, my dad went first, and then my mom passed away second. So we tried to sell it, and she paid $25,000 for it in 1977. We sold it for $6,000 in 2021. And the reason we sold it for so little was because of the covenants on it. So basically, what the covenants said was the first house to build on that road in this subdivision had to pay for all of the sewage pipes, all of the water pipes, and all of the electric wire and poles to be brought into that entire road. And then as more houses came in, they would give you their portion. So, if there were 12 houses on the road, you'd pay for all of it up front. And then as each one sold, they would give you 1/12. Well, that means that we're funding the infrastructure of that subdivision. So nobody ever built in that area. And that's why it sold for so little compared to what we paid for it. And just to think, there's not a single house on that road since, and that's been since 1977. Yeah, and unfortunately, you have to, as we talk about our other main focus, which is prepping, you have to consider that and take that into consideration. How are you going to dispose of your waste, whether that be solid waste or whether it be human waste? And when I say solid waste, I mean things like trash. Okay, so how are you going to take care of that if you don't have people from the government there to take care of it for you, whether that be sewage or whether that be waste management? Then the other, of course, is what are you going to do with electricity? And then the third one is how are you going to get your water? So, and how are you going to purify it? So those all three, we take those for granted because we've had them for so long. And, and when I think back, to the generation just before me, they were not as common. When I look back to the generation before me, we had only a 40% high school graduation rate. And I mean, even in the 1930s and 1940s, we didn't even have above a 30%, 35% literacy rate. So, I mean, things have changed in my lifetime, and looking back on how my parents and grandparents had it compared to how I have it, compared to how the kids today have it, I don't know how a lot of people will survive without their cell phones. And to me, it's a boat anchor, So Joe says, government officials are few, but make the rules. We are many, but never say enough is enough. One book of God per culture. Are we actually sheep? Well, we've elected people who have turned over their responsibilities to the executive branch. That's all I can say. So yeah, Code of Federal Regulations is basically where you're going to find that. First, they get published in the Federal Register, and then once they get published and approved, then they go into the CFR. So Stray Kitten, I want to say that we are basically a lazy people. And that we want other people to do things for us. And as long as we don't have to worry about it or work on it, then we're happy. And you can see that with fast food. You can see that with a lot of different things. But we become entrenched in our own little microcosm of society. And I would say that the generations today, and even my daughter's generation, that they don't have the same thing I had. When I was a kid, we all played outside. We drank out of the hose, in the yard when we were thirsty, but we played outside until the sun went down and the street lights came on. Our parents sat outside and drank tea and talked with each other. And then all of a sudden we had black and white TV. And black and white TV, we all moved inside. So all those street conversations where you knew everybody, you played with all the other kids, they kind of went away when we came in with TV. And so TV was one of those changing things, one of those turning points in our society that changed how we were. And then I'm going to say cell phones was another major turning point. When I was growing up, we had the rotary dial, and it was on a base with a handset that you maybe had about 6 feet cord that you had to the handset. Then they came out with the Princess that hung on the wall. Then the Princess came out with touch tone dialing instead of the rotary dial. I mean, all these improvements that came along. when I did my senior term paper, my English teacher actually had a ruler, well, not a ruler, but a measured template where she put that template over our paper to make sure that our typing was in the margins that she had asked for. And you could flunk senior English because your margins were incorrect or your footnotes went too far down into the down below at the end of the paper because we were using typewriters. And so, we had to measure all that stuff out, think all that stuff out, and think out, oh, I've got a footnote here. How much space do I need for that footnote? Oh, 3 sentences. So I need to end this 3 sentences early so I can put the footnote in. I mean, we had to do things a hard way, and life is a lot easier now. And I think, and we like that. We like the fact that it's easier for us. Absolutely. And that's, my grandmother did the same thing. She had, I want to say it was kind of like a watering trough. If you think of a dairy farm where they have these big, maybe 250-gallon troughs, galvanized steel that was in the kitchen, believe it or not. And, but it looked like a bathtub, but, and then it had a drain that would drain outside, but you could take the water directly from the stove over to the watering trough. And her stove was a wood burning stove, by the way. So heat in the house was all provided by that one wood burning stove. So yeah, we've made great enhancements to the way we live over the course of the last, let's say 75 years, just monumental change. Yes, you're absolutely right, Cats and Prepping. Rule making takes place in lieu of the legislative process because the legislators gave up that inside their rule, inside when they pass a law, if you look at it, it says, and the Secretary of shall have the authority to make rules as necessary. Okay. And if you look at it in the Constitution, we've done that a couple places. So, let's see here. The Senate and House are authorized to create their own rules on how they're going to operate. Looking for a couple of good examples here. I'm sure I can find a couple. No, I'm not going to find any good ones here real quick. With the consent of Congress, with the approval of Congress, when the legislature cannot be convened, application of the legislature or of the executive against domestic violence. So even in the Constitution, there's all kinds of places where basically it says, this is the normal way, but you can use the abnormal way under extreme measures. We've kind of taken that under extreme measures and moved it to a different level. Grateful Preps, New Jersey. Welcome. Good to see you, my friend. I hope you get something out of this and follow us. I think that this is the one area where I believe purely in qualifications. I am, Governor, what's his name? DeSantis announced today that he is eliminating DEI in every form in the state of Florida. And I agree with that. We need a system where we have people who are being hired, appointed based on knowledge, experience, and competence, not based upon some far-fetched reason, age, gender. I don't believe that men are better than women. I don't believe that women are better than men. I don't believe that either should be given a hiring preference because of who they are. We tried that. We tried that starting back in 1963, where under Equal Employment Opportunity, EEO, we gave preferential treatment. We said that's going to cause equity to eventually happen, equality to eventually happen. And it hasn't happened. We got to find a better way to do it. And maybe the way to do it is to say, if you're not qualified, you don't get the job. I'm not, in my mind, I wonder, was the safety inspector for Boeing, after all these wheels and door plugs and everything else have blown off and engines catching fire, is the safety inspector or the inspector for maintenance, is that a DEI hire? Or were they hired because they knew what they were doing? And it doesn't make sense to me that all these things are happening. I hope I didn't offend anybody there, but I just believe in hiring based upon qualifications. One of my biggest pet peeves, I'll go on a small rant here for you, is if we have a person who has committed a crime, okay, and let's say person stole $50, then we're going to put them in jail for 2 years. So we say, we found you guilty, okay, and we're going to punish you for it. So we say you're a convicted felon, you're going to go to jail for 2 years, bang. Once those 2 years are up, we still hold the fact that they were in jail against them. In my opinion, they've served out their punishment. They were punished for the crime that they committed. And if we say punish them for life, then punish them for life. But if we say your punishment is 2 years in jail, then once you're out of jail for those 2 years, they should be able to have their life start anew. And they should be able to get back into the workforce and, they need a second chance. And I think that part of the reason that we have such a high recidivism rate is because we don't give them a chance to reintegrate back into society. We hold it against them. True, very true. Yeah, and that was one of the advantages of having a child was, when dad wanted to watch something, we had you had to turn it on the TV, you had to crank it on the TV. So in El Paso, we had 3 channels, 4, 9, and 13. And so I had to get up and change the channel. Now, where Helen grew up, I think they only had 1 channel. Is that right? Right. Yeah, 1 channel. She had 1 channel for most of her life. NBC. And until the time of the advent of cable, and then they got more. So yeah, changing the antenna, I can wholeheartedly understand that. I can understand changing the channel. I also remember when mom and dad, they had these stick-on screens that you could stick on your TV, kind of a plastic thing that had blue up for the top third, and then white for the bottom third, and then green for the bottom third. Kind of gave you the illusion of color TV. That was a big thing. I remember back then. Amen. And that's just the way it is. They control everything. There's a lot of debate right now about this digitally based, what is it? CBDC, computer-based digital coin, CBDC. There we go. Here's what you don't understand is if you take a look at the M2 money supply, okay, which is the total amount of currency that's floating around the world called US dollars, 96% of all the U2 money that's out there, M2 money that's out there, United States M2 money that's out there, it only exists on ledgers in books. It's an electronic figure. So only 4% is actually minted or printed as bills or coins. So we're already 96% CBDC. And so just think about that. When you go out, how many of you pay cash, or do you use your credit card or debit card? Do you write a check? Do you have electronic transfer of funds? So like with our house payment, just every month they just take it out of our checking account. We don't write a check. We don't do anything. It's electronically transmitted fund, ETF. And so those kinds of things happen where the vast majority of the transactions that we have are digital right now. Okay. Okay, I get on Amazon. I say, hey, I want to buy, as a matter of fact, it just came in the mail today. So I wanted to get reading Koine Greek. So studying Greek, Koine Greek for my Bible studies. And so I paid for that with an Amazon credit card. Okay. So that Amazon credit card, come the 6th of next month, there will be a bill arrive here in paper, and we will pay that with an electronic transfer of funds from our checking account to Amazon. And then Amazon is going to pay their people on that as well. Now, if I had been smart and set that up to where it was a book that I was going to get a commission on, then I would have gotten 2% rebate as selling it to myself. But I didn't. So then I would get an electronic transfer of funds from Amazon to my checking account for that commission for having sold something off the Amazon account. So all of that's taking place electronically. There's no cash moving anywhere. Okay. Yeah, tinfoil on the antenna ears, rabbit ears. And I'm not sure many people even know what a rabbit ear is. But it was a little black semicircle, had 2 antennas, and they usually had, you could expand it. There were 3 segments, so you could expand it, up to where it's 3 times the normal length. And then you could angle them pretty much either straight up or all the way out. And then you could turn it on top of your TV so you could have the best collection of the signal that you were trying to capture. Yeah. And so, that was quite a trick as well. That is great. That is great. I wish we had more of that. Well, one thing that did, what was it? 26th Amendment, I believe. Where's my Constitution? So the one thing that I have to say is decent, 27th. No law varying the compensation for the services of senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So basically, if you vote yourself a pay raise, the people have the right to vote you out, is basically what the 27th Amendment says. Yes. And both first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening. You're absolutely right, Pat. I'd forgotten about that. I believe you're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Yeah, we kind of did that in our neighborhood too. We had all the kids over for Saturday morning cartoons, and Sky King and Lloyd Bridges and what was that? Sea Hunt, I think it was. And gosh, and Roy Rogers and the cartoons and everything else, and Tom Terrific and all those different grades. The one that I never really understood, to this day, you can't convince me otherwise. My mind's made up. But I think that Bullwinkle and Rocky was an adult. It was written for adults. There was too much adult humor in that. You had to be a little bit more sharp to understand what was going on with Rocky and Bullwinkle the vast majority of the time. A lot of good puns, a lot of good anecdotes and things like that. And it was just really something else. Well, supposedly DEI is an extension of the Civil Rights Act. So the Civil Rights Act basically gave preferential hiring to people because the thought process behind the Civil Rights Act was that people had been institutionally prejudiced and kept out of the opportunity to have the same education as everybody else. And so for one generation, we needed to have where people could be placed or given some sort of a compensation for having that lack of education that was considered institutional racism. Then at the end of that, the Civil Rights Act was supposed to basically expire. It never has expired. So now DEI is saying, well, you know what? We still don't have equality in education. We still don't have this. We still don't have that. Now they're even taking it further back. And I think, what is it, 1619 project, saying that there's been institutional prejudice against blacks in America since 1619 or whatever, and they will never catch up. And therefore, they need to have all these positions automatically without any qualifications whatsoever. And that's basically what DEI is saying. And then, of course, the same thing with genders and things like that. Yes, and then at 10 o'clock, they used to have, at least in El Paso when I was growing up, before they started the local news, the 10 o'clock version of the local news, they would always say, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Thank you, Diana, too. See, you guys are so great. Thank you. So Koine Greek, they're basically, there was Athenian Greek, which is considered classical Greek. Spartan had their own. Each one of the different areas had their own Greek. Then when Alexander the Great started conquering all these countries and forming his great empire, all the way down into Egypt, they needed a common language. And so he decided he was going to take all the different forms of Greek and turn them into one form of Greek, and that was called Koine. And so it's different from classical, which is Athenian Greek. That's the ancient classical Greek, slightly. There are some nuances in words and verbs and meaning and things like that, but they change over time, just as we do in English and just as we do in Russian. And so Koine Greek was the Greek that was used by Alexander the Great. And of course, his 4 generals who took over upon his death. One of his generals took over Egypt. It was his daughter, Cleopatra, who was the Pharaoh of Egypt. So she was not Egyptian blood. She was actually Greek blood. And so the 2 languages that were common throughout that world come the time of Cleopatra were either Latin or Koine Greek. And so Koine Greek was kind of it was considered more or less the language of commerce, like English is today. And so it also gets into a little bit of the Bible. When Alexander the Great conquered Samaria, Judea, Galilee, basically the northern and southern tribes of Israel, then he forced everything to be done in Greek. And so you've got 6 books called the Apocrypha. The Septuagint, 7 books, Septuagint, that were written in Greek for about a 300-year occupation of Greece over Israel. And so all of the texts that were written for the church were written in Greek. So in 100 AD, the Jewish people said, no, we're going to reject all those books because they're written in Greek and not in Hebrew. Then in 1517, when Martin Luther left the church and formed his own church, he says, we're going to throw out those same books because they were written in Greek and not in Hebrew. So there are 7 books that were canonized in 425 AD as part of the Bible that were taken out of the Bible by Martin Luther. He also took out some others, but some guys like Wesley and what's his name in Switzerland, starts with a C. Anyhow, they added them back in. So if you take a look at a Lutheran Bible, they don't have Revelation, Jude, James, Hebrews, some of the New Testaments that they don't have. But anyhow, so that's so that was the language of that area, the commerce language, and that's basically what most of the New Testament was written in, was Koine Greek. Good night, Pat. Take care. Yes, I have heard the same thing, Theoxerus. Absolutely. I've heard the exact same thing. Yeah, and my wife tells the story of her brother, her older brother. There's about 17 years difference between her and her older brother, and he had that happen a couple times. Triple G, take care. Please stay safe, and I hope you get home safe as well. Let me see here. Anything else? Pink Panther was also for older ones. Yes, I agree with that. I didn't watch Pink Panther that much, though. I really loved Bullwinkle, Fractured Fairy Tales, other things like that. So it was really great. Okay, so we're pretty much done. So let me grab this, and we will go to. Oh, by the way, I did get another one in too. So 3 new books this week, just in case. Really excited about it. Boy, I've been just reading up a storm at the expense of my other one. So I got in Reading Koine Greek. I got in Consoling the Heart of Jesus, a do-it-yourself retreat. And I got in my study Bible, which basically is a side-by-side English with Koine Greek and explanations down below. So really had an exciting time this week. Okay, let's go to the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24, 25, 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So I would like to remind you that tomorrow night we'll be talking about basically week 9 of food storage for preppers, this book here. So we do have some things. Not some of the things that really excite me, but they may excite you, but we'll take care. So remember that we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Thank you for being kind, polite, and respectful to each other. That is an absolutely essential thing here on this channel, and I appreciate the fact that you cooperate. So with that, just remember, you aren't going to get through this alone. We got to do this together. Take care, everybody. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.